Great to see so many people here. My name is Rebecca Amroth. I'm a CEMS alumna, and I will be hosting this session. So the first thing we will do is to just check. It's great to see so many CEMS alumni here. So the first thing we will do is to check who has paid their membership year. We're going to take a record when you leave. Joke aside, so I'm very pleased to be here, and I have a very distinguished panel, which is a mix of alumni and also corporate partners. But first, we're going to start with the keynote speak from Professor Rolf Bustenhagen. And he's going to speak about preparing CEM students for a world that is 1.5 degrees warmer. So welcome.
So welcome. It's a pleasure to be here and talk to people who have graduated from this program, to which I've been affiliated with for a long time now. It's also a pleasure to have some of my colleagues here in the room, Stefano Kobus, who's heading the faculty group Business and Environment, and Agnes Rucker, who's also teaching in the CEMS program in climate change. So what I wanted to share with you in the next couple of minutes is just a bit of an experience between what happened 10 years ago and where we are right now. So 10 years ago, in 2009, you might remember this was the dark days where Lehman Brothers had just disappeared. Lots of people thought about the financial crisis. 2009 also, if you go back, maybe. So 2009 also having a Swedish moderator here, I'm sure you will remember who that was, Malina Ernman, who at that time was singing the Eurovision Song Contest, making 21st place in Moscow. We feel with it. Switzerland also often has this kind of ranking there. But Malina Ernman is better known for being the mother of Greta Thunberg, who at that time probably just about left kindergarten, and she's about the age of my daughter, so that's kind of where that assessment comes from. So nobody was really kind of thinking about climate change. Or nobody? Well, there were some people in this small kind of Gallic village. So let's zoom into that village. And indeed there was the faculty group that was already mentioned, Business and Environment. So some people there kind of had this crazy idea of maybe doing something that it climate change worldwide. That included my colleague Rafael Sada from ESADE. And we started off for the first time with just St. Gallen and ESADE students, kind of a couple of them coming together and simulating the UN climate change policy negotiations. Maybe some of you in the room have been with that. Great to see you again. So that kind of was happening 10 years ago. And one of the slides that we always kind of show the students there, maybe some of you remember that as well, is this in terms of there is a challenge of kind of human beings, organizations of dealing with non-linear change. Like for example, this one here, the average temperature in the world over the last 1,000 years was kind of roughly stable. The forecast for the next 100 years looks very different, and we're right here where kind of this continuous change is happening. Nowadays, people talk about 1.5 degrees, so that's the idea of staying at the lower end of that range of possible temperature changes. That was 10 years ago. 10 years after, the Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, says, and disruption is happening now, and it is happening to all of us. And for those of you who kind of look at the world with open eyes, it's hard to not see it happening. I mean, you see hurricanes like the Orient here, all these pictures after the last 12 months. You see wildfires now in Australia, previously in California. You see landslides here in Austria. You see flooding in Venice just recently. So, I mean, this is really something that has become a very urgent problem. At the same time, also 10 years later, I think we're also seeing an unprecedented dynamic of positive change. The little girl who just went out of kindergarten 10 years before is now on the cover of Time magazine and has pretty much started a global movement. When I left my hotel room this morning, I saw kind of TV coverage of Green Friday, so around the world, young kids on the street and protesting for more climate action. To the extent that the European Parliament last week has declared climate emergency, that the European Investment Bank has announced that they would stop lending to fossil fuel projects, We also see that reflected in business, like, for example, Volkswagen now saying that they are wrapping up electric car factories to compete with Tesla, which is interesting because a few years ago, I mean, nobody in the car industry would have taken Tesla seriously. Now, this seems to be really changing. Well, and of course, we're teaching more climate change role-plays around the way. Now, with actually 9 university who are participating, and we now have more than 900 alumni, and you seem to see it there. What's also happened in those 10 years, and what's, I think, helpful, is tremendous changes in the relative cost of different technologies. For example, you see here numbers for the cost of generating electricity from different sources. 10 years ago, solar power was on top of the list in terms of the most expensive technology that you could think of. And you see how this has come down, how now solar and wind are the lowest cost sources of electricity in the United States, even lower than coal and gas. Now, people take very different conclusions from this. So like two American gentlemen here who, one of them basically says, well, if solar is so cheap, then I should probably invest in large solar parks. And the other one says, well, if coal is more expensive, then I should probably do something to help coal. So yes, we're still in that period. But I think what's really behind it is we're facing a fundamental change in how CO2 emissions and financial performance are related. So for the last 150 years or so, we became wealthy by burning fossil fuels. So there was a positive correlation between CO2 emissions and financial performance. But this is about to change. If you think of all the risks that come with climate change, if you think of the new opportunities that come with the different competitiveness of those new technologies, I think we're in this period of time kind of seeing really a change in how CO2 emissions and financial performance is related. Worked for weeks on this animation and you see it. The Economist printed a media that have these kinds of animations, but that's pretty much a similar message here. So I think we actually, when we think about what's still left to be done, I think that would make 3 points. The first point, one thing that needs to be done is we need to speed up. So with kind of the dynamics of climate risk as it unfolds, business as usual is really not an option. And if you look at these graphs here from The Economist, they're plotted for coal, oil, and gas, 3 main fossil fuels. What kind of the business as usual forecast is, that's the blue line. Then the yellow line is kind of taking into account current policy measures that have been proposed, and that's still far away from the 1.5 or 2 degree targets that we have, which would be the red or the green line. So you see how much, to what extent, and also how quickly we need to reduce burning fossil fuels. Coal the fastest because coal has the highest carbon content, but oil and gas also not too late after that. And all of that needs to happen in the next 2 decades. Fortunately, there's lots of new business models around solar, wind, electric mobility, battery charging that come up, and where some of these companies like Shell, for example, are consciously kind of making investments in those new companies to capture these opportunities. The second thing that we need to take into account is we need to be aware of transition risks. So even if we kind of know that we need to kind of reduce carbon, it's not a straightforward thing to move from one to the other. For example, because of this thing that's called the carbon bubble, which basically means, if you look at this graph here, if you kind of take all the fossil fuel resources that are still in the ground and kind of think about how much CO2 would be emitted by burning them, you come to a number of about 15,000 gigatons of CO2 that are still in the ground. If you look at how much still fits into the atmosphere before we exceed the 2 degree target, that's a much smaller number. It's in the order of magnitude of 800 gigatons of CO2. And if we have a lot of resources in the ground where kind of coal, oil, and gas companies are perceived to be valuable when they have access to those resources, assuming that someone will buy from them and burn it. But at the same time, we have this kind of natural capacity limit in the atmosphere. And you see the mismatch. You understand why people like Mark Carney, the governor of the Bank of England, now warns of huge losses if we don't really properly manage those carbon risks. Last but not least, and I'd like kind of ending on positive notes, I think one thing that really is an opportunity is intergenerational learning. with all these kids on the streets now, I more and more often kind of have students in my class who say, my younger brother or sister has started kind of talking to me about climate change, and that's a completely new phenomenon. I invited one of those kids to the last CEMS course on climate change. So there was a 17-year-old girl from the local school who taught her 24-year-old peers anything they ever wanted to know about climate change. And they were quite impressed. They were impressed by the knowledge that she had, but also by the kind of young energy that came across. And I think that's an opportunity of really interacting with all these energized kids. I think can help also companies to come closer to solutions. So I'll end here by saying we live in a world of nonlinear change. The global climate challenge is really on top of the agenda for policymakers, for business leaders, for investors, and also young people. Reducing carbon risk is definitely key. The good news is low carbon solutions have become dramatically more affordable. We need to be prepared for a 1.5-degree world. For that, we really need to increase speed. So this is an urgent problem. We need to manage transition risk, and we need to engage in intergenerational dialogue. My colleagues in the faculty group and I are happy to kind of keep teaching this course, and if anybody would like to team up with us, we're happy to hear from you. Thank you very much.
Does anyone have any question that you want to ask Rob? Yeah.
The impacts of climate change. So the largest part comes from burning fossil fuels, coal, oil, and gas. All of those contain carbon. In relative terms, coal contains more carbon. So stopping to burn coal is even more urgent. I think that's an important part. Get away from fossil fuels, get into renewables. But also deforestation is another thing. So trees can absorb CO2. If we cut trees, we lose that carbon sink.
Are there economical incentives for emerging countries to stop burning coal?
Yes. Well, I mean, you see some of these multilateral banks, like the European Investment Bank now, starting to say we don't lend to those projects anymore. You see some of the sovereign wealth funds, like the Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund, making similar statements. There is talk about some sort of a global carbon tax, but as we've learned from many of those simulations, I wouldn't be too optimistic of sort of the kind of overall global solution anytime soon.
What is your stance on, because some people would say we will not be able to solve the challenge, we need to get CO2 out of the atmosphere, like big investors like Bill Gates behind. Yep. What's your stand on it? Do you think it's something feasible?
Well, Bill Gates, sometimes I get upset about my Microsoft products. That's my first association that comes with Bill Gates. But in terms of getting CO2 out of the ground, yes, there is a discussion about can we kind of make that transition fast enough. The challenge with getting CO2 out of the ground is it's been kind of proven in sort of small-scale technical pilot projects. It's not been proven on a large commercial scale. So there's this remaining challenge of really making it commercially viable. And then, I mean, we're putting 33 gigatons of CO2 into the atmosphere every year. That's a huge amount. Where would you want to put that? I mean, I think that's an issue with just the sheer volume of CO2 that would have to be captured somewhere.
In terms of the best things to accelerate the movement towards sustainability, is it like solar panels at home plus electric cars, or like what are the things that will speed things up the most?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, I do think things like kind of the electrification of buildings and transport in combination, that's a very promising area, because buildings and transport together are, I don't know, something like 40 to 50%, depending on the country, of all the emissions. I think another thing that's very promising, and maybe it links over then to you, is of course also the changes in investment. So kind of an increase in sustainable finance, kind of shifting investment flows, are also a very important element in this transition.
Maybe 2 more questions, and then we.
Just two, one. Partnering up with you, how exactly would that look like? What have you thought about? And how can we leverage in CEMS Alumni? I mean, now we're listening, and I think we're always moved, but what should we do?
Yeah. Well, partnering up, there's ways of getting engaged in the role play for universities, for example. CEMS schools were not yet part of it. We've talked to some already yesterday to potentially also get involved. But also corporate partners in terms of kind of being there, kind of going to the individual courses at the different schools and engaging with the students there. Other than that, I mean, there's been a call for action last year at the 10th occasion of the role play, where kind of there was many CEMS students and alumni kind of signing up for it. And I think there's potential to also kind of think about what else can we do. For example, one of the things we're trying to do now is to reduce emissions from the role play itself, because students have to travel. And we've come up with travel grants. If students kind of take the train rather than flying, they get kind of reimbursed for the train ticket. To keep doing that, we obviously need funding at some point. That's another way for teaming up.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
One last thing, sorry. Because I work, so I founded a small business in Sabrina. I founded a business on edible insects as a protein alternative. So I think meat consumption would probably also be like one part where we as individuals could also take an expense.
Yes.
Saving CO2 carbon emissions. Even though it's not the biggest part, I know, but
yeah, for sure. Eating less meat is a good idea.
Maybe we can say change later.
Yeah. I'm a vegetarian, so you want.
So I graduated 20 years ago from the CEMS program, and I went into quite traditional industry, to investment banking and then to asset management. And what I realized quite quickly is that you can be very powerful when you look after other people's capital. I decided to resign from the more traditional asset manager I was working for and join a startup that was focused on sustainability investments. So that's why I'm here today. So just in terms of vocabulary, there is a lot of different terms when it comes to sustainability, responsible investing. And these are maybe 3 separate discussions, but they all link together. So you have impact investing, which tends to be family offices, wealthy individuals that want to do, that have the attitude that the capital can do a little bit more than just returns. You have the sustainability investing, which is quite focused on institutional investors, but it's also still linked to managing risks and having the fiduciary duty that you have maybe if you look after pension funds. And then you have the ESG and responsibility, which is more linked to corporates, and they're kind of having the right to operate. And while we speak about that this is something new, then I would argue that this has been around for some time in terms of having values in investment that you do. So in the 70s, there were a lot of saying no and excluding investments that you don't want to do. Then it came the kind of blended returns where you were thinking of either you do impact or you generate returns. So there came the social enterprise model. Now we are in the on the right side where actually you can get returns from having sustainability and impact. And when I look at all these words, I also see that the core criteria, which is really the common thing among them, is that you are intentional in your investments and you also want to be impactful. So just to round off before I have my distinguished panel, it's just what is a good investment? And can you really do that? Can you make good and also make a good return? So I'm just going to use an example from my own portfolio. We will look at something that is called controlled environment agriculture, which is a fancy word for growing in horizontal greenhouses. So greenhouses is an example where you remove both geography and geology from your growing. And it actually, you have a lot of resource productivity, so you can be 95% more water efficient. You don't have any runoff. You also consume very little land. And then also, if you look from a labor perspective, there's no seasonality because this is a growing factory more or less. So you have staff where you can offer permanent jobs. and you can also choose where you want to grow your produce. And here is also a lot of opportunity. You can see this example is you have a greenhouse here, and then it actually sits on a power plant. So we all remember from biology that if you want a plant to grow, they need CO2 for the photosynthesis. So that here the flue gas and the excess heat is captured from the, this is a gas power plant, and it goes into the greenhouse, which also has added benefits. So here you have, and then you also have the benefit of food quality, food security, and also this project gets a very strong cash flow, so you can get plus 15% return. So this is then an example of how you have both an economic and a competitive advantage. So the produce tastes better. You have the, and we will hear maybe ask Lidl what they think about this, but I would argue that you can see that the demand, you really hit the demand from the retailers. It's a growth market, and you have incorporated climate resiliency in the food chain. So with that, I want to introduce my panel. So because there's many panelists, I thought that the first thing I will ask each one to do is to do a short introduction, then also maybe comment on what is sustainability for you, what does it mean in your world. Should we start with you, Rafaela?
I can start. So hello from my side. My name is Rafaela. I'm External Communications Public Affairs Manager at Coca-Cola HBC Austria. Just a short explanation about the Coke system, because later on it will play a role. So we have the Coca-Cola company, which is the owner of the brands. They do the brand marketing, they creating demand by the consumer, and we are the bottler. So we are actually the ones producing the products and delivering to our customers, just for setup. When it comes to sustainability, for me personally, I think it's a topic you can't separate from doing business, and this is also our approach at Coca-Cola. Try to do our business in the most sustainable way, which means that we kind of stretch ourselves until we get out of our comfort zone, and set ourselves targets that are even higher than the EU targets. And on the other hand, taking responsibility for the communities we're operating in, and also for the stakeholders we need to kind of satisfy. So for me, sustainability has always different points and angles you need to keep in mind.
Hi, from my side, my name is Sarah Akun, and I'm a CEMS alumni from, homeschool Norway, and then St. Gallen. Just turned out to learn even later, so really thanks for that, Rolf. What I do is I'm now actually one of the co-founders of Pure Energy. It's a company working on virtual power plants. Basically, it's just pure renewable power plants being aggregated in one portfolio and commercially optimized 24/7, so that efficiencies and gains are higher. I will come back to that if needed. But before that, I was working for about 10 years for a corporate partner called Statkraft, a Norwegian state-owned renewable company. And back then I was doing power trading in about 24 countries and doing some project development. And since the beginning of my career, I think, in my words, sustainability is basically, at least in my domain and in my space, it was basically me enabling the transformation of the power systems, and also increasing or enabling the increase of the number of megawatt hours, the green ones, into the grid with whatever I am doing in my daily life. So, and this was basically, that became a passion. So I don't remember a single day which I kind of went to the office kind of bored or not motivated. So it still continues that way. I think it's sustainable then.
Hi everyone, so I'm Deirdre. I graduated from the Smurfit, the Dublin Business School. I did my CEMS in Louvain-la-Neuve in Belgium, and I suppose went down the more traditional route of just working in business, finance and marketing in different routes, and then I became very passionate about sustainability. I returned to the school where I did CEMS to do a master's in sustainability, and then I've been mainly focused on working in the food sector sustainability. So I think it was interesting the comment made about just the alternative to meats and things like that. It's something we're very conscious on in retail. So Yeah, I spent a number of years working for a variety of different food companies, from Nestle, Metro Group, Subway, always in that sphere, and working for Kerrygold. I think anyone who's from Germany will know Kerrygold in the room. So worked in sustainability and dairy, but now I've moved to the retail sector, which I find the most interesting because there's huge scope for impact within the retail space. So for 3 years, I've was responsible for implementing the first kind of sustainability strategy at Lidl Ireland and Northern Ireland. So I think, you know, it's very interesting when you're in a retail space. I mean, even the discussions already we've had have been very much focused on carbon. But I suppose sustainability for us means so many other things as well. Like when we look at the plastic debate and reductions of plastic, and even social sustainability within our supply chains. And I think, you know, there's already 2 million people displaced because of climate change. So there's huge social impact. So looking at kind of like a just transition towards, you know, the more sustainable future as well. So there's a lot of topics we work on, be it you know, from social sustainability to environmental sustainability perspective. So I think it's much broader than just carbon, but I think sometimes there's so many topics within the sustainability space that maybe we're getting distracted from the huge reality that really is the most impactful piece, which is climate.
Thank you very much. My name is Markus Haas. I work for the Austrian Trade Promotion Agency, Advantage Austria. Here in Austria, we come under the head of the Chamber of Commerce, VCO. And basically my job was, since I graduated from CEMS, was to support Austrian companies with their export business in different countries. And since 2 years, I'm back here in the headquarters. My task is basically to support companies now with financing projects with mainly development banks. And if you talk development banks, that means the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations, which have been enacted in 2015, but have only gained since a year enormous, I would say, exponential power, or in the influx into the general debate. And I become really passionate when it comes to sustainability, and I scribbled down tons of words or notes, which I will refer to later on. But because the question was asked, what can everybody do to be more sustainable? I mean, we just had yesterday Black Friday, and hands up, who bought something yesterday? I mean, you're not on video, it's okay. You can be honest. Okay. So we're talking to a very advanced auditorium already, but I think if you think about what things do you really need in your daily life, 98% of the things you own, you don't need it. Since I've come back, I have a small flat now. Let me just tell this brief story. And I have a garage. And when I moved back, tons of cartons I'm put into the garage. And I don't need them. For 2 years, I haven't used my baking machine, or I haven't used other things. And if you think about what you really need in your daily life, and what you have at home, I think there's a huge impact already what you can do. Think when you buy, think which products you buy, how long they will last, what value chain is before it, the external effects that might have on the clothing, the clothing industry, for example. Some people in Bangladesh, in Indonesia, are suffering just because you're buying a new jean. And I think our economic system is or will change a lot in the next decades. And we've just grown up and learned a system of money and incentivizing people to have more and more and more money. But if you look at the statistics, if you take GDP per capita, you take the US, over the past 20, 30 years, GDP has been steadily rising. Happiness and satisfaction of people, more difficult to measure, of course, but if you take the same questions, it has been steady as ever. So the question is, are you really more happy if you buy a new whatever product, electronic product online on the Black Friday? Or shouldn't you maybe go home and have a chat with your grandma? So that's my saying.
My name is Sigrid Starker. I'm a professor here of Environmental Economics and Policy. I founded the Institute for Ecological Economics. Ecological economics assumes that the economy is embedded in, meaning if the environment isn't doing well, it's difficult for society and for the economy. So it's not just, well, we are using some resources or we are emitting some climate gases, and this is sort of the parts of the economy that are impacted. It's much deeper than that. So along these lines, also our modeling and our conceptual framework starts with taking the environment into account. Ecological economics is called economics, but it's really an interdisciplinary field of study, which sounds like not right because it's a disciplinary name, but it refers to oikos, which is the house, the household in Greek. And it's not just about the housekeeping of humans, but it's also about the housekeeping of nature. The two are very much intertwined. And if we want to study both of them, we do need to draw on expertise from natural scientists as well as other social scientists and of course economists like myself. So this is the field that I work in. In my institute, we have a few research areas, and what we have determined early on is we want to not just be the ones who are doing environmental assessment or environmental valuation. We've done that. We've always stayed away from cost-benefit analysis because that doesn't go with the philosophical underpinnings of ecological economics. We rather do multi-criteria analysis and participatory processes because that also leads to rankings of options. That's good enough normally for making a decision, but we didn't want to be stuck in sort of that fringe areas that are sort of correcting after the fact, but we thought that we would go to the core. We're looking for levers for change. So the research areas that we have are macroeconomics and the environment. So colleagues there, that's an area that's led by Astrid Macri, and they're doing stock flow consistent modeling, which accounts for heterogeneity of factors, so linking it up with agent-based modeling and also accounting for biophysical boundaries, such as the 1.5-degree goal. Because macroeconomic models, normally they are growth-oriented and they don't have a concept of absolute boundaries. How they are taking the environment into account is being more efficient. Which is great, of course we want to be more efficient, and less efficient would be ridiculous, but if we produce more, we may outgrow the efficiency reductions. But for the planet, it's the absolute amount that counts, not the unit, the emissions per unit GDP. So that's a wrong category to look after, and so these are sort of different types of models that we're trying to develop. There's also socioeconomics of work. Decidedly not just employment, because I think we need to go back a few steps and think about what is work and what kind of work is required in society. And we have a long history of part of productivity being paid out in income and part of it in more leisure time, meaning reducing working hours. But since the 80s, we've basically only had income increases and much less reductions of working time. So maybe there is an aspect in it, but it's not enough. It's not just about working time reduction, it's more than that. So that is macroeconomics and the environment, then sustainable work. Then we also have climate finance and economics. So our colleagues Irene Monasterolo and Emanuele Campliglio are talking a lot to central banks, what they can do in terms of, for example, if they're doing quantitative easing, couldn't they take environmental indicators into account? And also to investors. Irene does a lot of climate stress tests for portfolios of large banks, also development banks and central banks. Then there is the group of global resource use that basically does physical accounting. We do not only need financial accounting of companies and cost accounting, and as well as national accounts, like for the whole economy, but also we need physical accounts so that we know what is actually going through our economy. So that we know exactly how to prioritize. The question that came up earlier, where should we start? Yeah, so we need physical accounts to be able to address that question. And the fifth group is socio-ecological transformation. So we know where we need to go, but how can that process work? What are pathways that would be satisfactory, and at the same time addressing social issues as well as environmental issues? Sorry, that was
No, thanks for that. So I gave the panelists 3 seating options, but it's interesting that we have the policy on this side and then the industry. So speaking with, maybe starting with you, Sigrid. So obviously you are, academic kind of help. What would be the,
if you had one policy or regulatory aspect that you could introduce to address the 1.5 degree climate warming, what would you do? How can you be the most effective in your line of work, you think? Right. Well, policy's task is to resolve social dilemma situations. Social dilemmas are characterized when individuals, when they are aiming to do best for themselves, they come to a different conclusion than what's best for the system. But that is not like gravity or something that we can't change, because that's based on the rules that we have. Markets are sets of institutions. Markets function according to the rules that we give the markets. And at the moment, the markets are sending the wrong signals, in part because 85% of climate gases are not priced at all. That is economics 101. We don't need to think about different paradigms in economics and so on. That leads to a misallocation of resources. Systematically, this is something we really shouldn't have. Yeah? And I haven't found an economist who disagrees. I find a lot of policymakers who are extremely hesitant, but I haven't found an economist who disagrees. Yet, we should not fall into the trap of thinking that introducing a decent carbon price, because the other 15%, most of them are under a carbon pricing regime, which really doesn't matter. It doesn't send enough signals. You know, even the EU emissions trading scheme with its price is 26 at the moment of that one. It doesn't do much. You know, it's better than nothing, but we really need to go up to the hundreds, fast. So that's a part of it, but it's definitely not enough. I think if you ask me to, that I can only have one measure, then I'm afraid it would have to be a more general one. And it would have to be moving away from the way of thinking, what can we do? Okay, we really want to do something. What can we do? Move away from that thinking, move towards what needs to be done, and how can we achieve that? It sounds similar, sounds a bit semantic, but it's a really different approach. Because with the first one, you often get stuck in, oh, we are improving efficiency and so on. Which again, it's great to improve efficiency, but you're sticking to the same business model, you're sticking to the same way of thinking, you're addressing the same customers. That's not going to achieve what we need. Just one number, minus 50% of emissions within 10 years. Sounds impossible. Denmark has reduced its emissions by 36% in 8 years. Well, that's pretty close, no? And we haven't heard much about it. It wasn't that painful. Yeah? So it can be done. There are lots of low-hanging fruits, but it can't be done just with the thinking of efficiency and profit maximization along the lines that were in the old thinking. So I think we need to go to what needs to be done and how can we get it done. And while we're at it, probably 50% is not good enough for countries that are represented here, because for making a fair contribution, it should be for rich countries like us, probably 80% in 10 years. So.
Okay, Marcus, so you mentioned that you're financing new companies. So how can you direct your financing to incentivize that there is more focus on sustainability with the right business models?
Well, let me come to the point of financing in a second.
Yeah.
I really love the input from Professor, but I would like to touch on one thing, because the climate change debate often is done in a very apocalyptic way, and we're in a crisis, climate crisis and so on. And yes, it's true, but I think communicating it in a negative way doesn't incentivize people to change, and we need change in the behavior of people. Now, if you're faced with something, with a fear, you always duck and you hide until it's over, right? What we need is people to stand up and to act. And but people in general are very resistant. They're reluctant to change their habits, but they're quick learners, and that's the positive thing. Now, what I think is really the key to have an effect is the money. I mean, our economy. Money always goes there where it draws the biggest benefits, and where there's less resistance. It's like water, but one has to guide it to its destination and channel it. And I think there's really the key solution. So what the EU currently is doing with their sustainable climate action plan, if you don't know it, Google it, is very interesting. Basically, the EU is much more looking forward than its national member states. They're coming up with a dichotomy of what is green, what is sustainable, what is blah, blah, blah. And then basically giving banks also the obliging banks to channel their money in those directions. This, now we're still in the conceptual phase, but we will see this happening in the next 5 years. And I think if a whole economic region like the European Union and the United States channel their money to more sustainable financial products, then that does a lot. And let me come back to the money topic, because I think we're also in this trap of systemic growth, which we always want to achieve, and where externalities are not priced in correctly. We're talking about CO2, but also I would phrase it more general. The word value. I mean, what does value mean? Now we only have an economic monetary measurement, but companies, and I think that's why it concerns all of us, companies should come forward with solutions that really deliver more value to its customers, and they should think ahead what value they can propose to their customers, because otherwise the negative effects will come towards them. And we see in the insurance industry, basically they're the first ones who moved into sustainable products, because they knew that if they're not going to change their policies, then basically their primes would be priced higher and higher. And yeah, so what was your question again?
No, I asked about how you direct in your organization, how you can direct the financing to projects.
Basically, what we try to convince our customers, which are the companies, is to think ahead and see the business opportunities that are in the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. And there's this number of $12 billion US dollars that are out there as business opportunities, and 380 million of jobs that can be created in the next 10 years through working towards more sustainable products. I think that's the key message.
So turning to the three industrial representatives or industry representatives. So if you had, Sigrid issued her policy to you to think about what needs to be done differently, how would you change your industries?
I think first of all, and I suppose that you probably wouldn't say it if you were speaking to the media, but if from a business perspective, any type of policy change that comes out, at least it means that everyone's competing on a level playing ground. So, we would have like the deposit return scheme that's in Germany and thing in Austria. It's now not functioning in Ireland or the UK at the moment, but it's money, but at least it's a level playing field. So any type of policy changes like that, and maybe the chamber would say something different, but at least if it's a level playing field, then, and then everyone tries to compete above that. So, the policy change really makes it so simple for everyone. France often come out and maybe they aren't as thought through in their policy changes, but just come out with food waste is no longer, it's policy change. You can't throw away food. So within a week, 2 weeks, all the retailers come up with solutions for donating their food waste, for what way they can selling it for €1 when it hits its expiry. So I think when policies are changed, people react quicker. So I mean, we'd as business be very, very open to that. But to answer, just to go back to what you were saying in terms of the debate around climate and being apocalyptic, and I actually believe that that's necessary. And I think what's happened in the last 12 months, it just makes my job so much easier because, and I joined Lidl 3 years ago and I was pushing an open door in terms of, rolling out projects. We've reduced our 80% in terms of like carbon reductions. We've now, moved from 3-year paybacks to 13-year paybacks for solar, wind and projects like that. But it would be over the last 12 months, it's been much easier because people are just like, what are we to do next? Or, and I think I think it's important that the society has that kind of view, because it is. an emergency. But I think business needs to realize the benefits. So I think that's what you were saying in terms of, and for our business, and and we do cost benefit analysis, and a lot of our projects cost millions, but we still do them, but it's quantified and it's thought through. It's just a process of thinking it through. But for us as a business, we see the efficiencies in terms of benefits, but we also see just the reputational, like it's reputation management as well. And that's how I would always argue a case of trying to get projects across the line, and it's risk management too.
So specifically for you, without stereotyping customers, but is the Lidl customer willing to pay a premium to buy a real product?
So what I find,
price matters as well.
Yeah. So what all the stats would say, and anytime I'm presenting to our board of directors to get a project, I'm like, and then Nielsen said that 94% of customers will pay X, Y, Z. The reality is, we don't charge more for. So we've maybe 30% of our products are sustainably certified over the last couple of years, like all it's fair trade, whatever type of certificate. We don't pass that on to the customer because it's not we're a discount retailer. So whatever margin project gets hit, we take that because we're always the lowest price. So we pay for sustainability. What I do believe though customers do pay for and will pay for is the kind of interconnection between better for you and better for me and better for the planet. Like organic or like those type of products, but just simply this and fair trade. So there's a few things like that are like social initiatives, like that customers will pay for. But ultimately, it's not our marketplace. There's niche kind of artisan products that are in terms of compostable, like let's say compostable packaging and things that customers will pay a little bit more for. But from a retail perspective, we wouldn't be looking for it. It's definitely a driver. It's a differentiator rather than, it gives preference in the market. We know that, and we analyze our customer loyalty every huge surveys on a monthly basis in terms of what we do in our social projects, environmental projects. And we know it builds brand loyalty and ultimately benefits our business, but we're not going to stick 10 cents onto a product because the packaging costs more, is more sustainable, just it's not our market.
Okay, Sarah.
Well, when you look at the energy business, also especially power business, you're in the middle of this big storm, right? So we just talked about how big the effect of power consumption and the ways how we generate power is really affecting the overall carbon emissions and all that. We're really going through a very exciting term, and the last 10 years, I thought that I have seen such big moves and all those big excite. But I'm quite sure that the next 10 years will be at least 10 times more exciting than the past 10 years. So, and what is really driving it, when you look into it, is basically, well, in our part of the business, it's all these 4 Ds. Well, basically, decentralization of the way how we generate power and even consume power. And then comes digitalization, maybe even in front of all of that, decarbonization, of course. And then hopefully at some stage, the democratization of power. So we are really going through a tremendous change in the value chain and how power consumers are meeting their demand and how they are really covering their needs to survive or to operate. But when you look at it, especially for the decarbonization part of it, well, there were 2 big effects. The first one, it was rather, I would say, marginal, because Sigrid just mentioned that it's around 15-16%, and it's typically or generally coming from the EU ETS, energy emission trading system, that the cost of carbon had a price, but it was not really significant over the last, I don't know, 10 years or so, and lately, like 1.5 years, it had a really great increase. But before that, it was around 5-6 euros. Now it's around 20-25. It also has been a bit speculated, but anyways, so now it has an effect. But what has happened? This is coming from, of course, the regulation side of it, but it was not really effective, I would say. And what is happening now is coming from the business side. It is the groups like RE100, for example, Renew 100. It's actually currently, I think the biggest, almost 220, 230 corporates all around the world. They have their own commitments, and they're now racing or competing each other to hit those targets, to really reach to the, for example, 2020 100% renewable power consumption, or 2025 or some sort of other sustainable targets. So this is really, I think now, this is really driving the industry or the change. And I think that there is no surprise that this is not coming from the legislation or regulation, because now, it is now driven by, I would say, market forces, or let's say even a bit awareness as well. But again, there is some market, let's say, not to lose customers kind of motivation as well. But it's good in any ways. So it's now happening. We're talking about 235 corporates, big ones, really like Amazon's, Microsoft's, Apple's, and all those, of the world. And now we see the effect of it. And we also, I don't know, maybe some of you have already heard the term corporate PPAs, corporate renewable power purchase agreements. This is now taking place, and big corporations are just contracting 10, 15 years of power purchasing directly from renewable assets. And this is, of course, this is also not having with an increased cost, not necessarily. They are fixing the costs. They have a predictable power cost, and they are consuming renewable power. So it's really a great deal. And that is why now, this is also the economics why it is working now. And also, this of course comes from the cost reductions of solar and wind. So this is now completing the picture. And now, of course, there are other problems in terms of grid stability and so on. But anyways, this seems to be a way to unlock the whole problem on this one. Yeah.
Do you want to have comments what you see changing for you?
I really like the discussion about the policies and how it will set a kind of playground for everybody. I also think that policies will help us to move faster out of our comfort zones as big corporates. And as we learned today, speed is everything when tackling these challenges. Maybe I can give you an example from the Austrian market, because it's just, what is nearest to my personal experience. So we launched our 100% Römerquelle rPET bottle for the whole portfolio just this year in April. And normally, if we introduce a new packaging like that, it would take ages for approval, alignments, meetings with the Coca-Cola company. You have to really check and so on. So at least I would say minimum 12 months. With this rPET bottle now we're using for Römerquelle, we did that whole process in, I think, 3 or 4 months. So you can see if there is the pressure, let's say, also the willingness to change something and to implement your own sustainable policies, as well as what your customers are requiring from you. Unbelievable things can happen and speed up the process massively. And what we did with the 100% Römerquelle bottle is still one of our benchmark projects in the whole system, and also speaks for the Austrian circular economy. And this is something, it's maybe a bit out of the topic, but I really want to give you as a consumers, think about the packaging debate and think about, is it really sustainable to drink out of glass bottles, or what about PET? Because every packaging has advantages and disadvantages. And what I would want from all participants, from politics, from industry, from consumers, from retailers, to put this whole discussion on climate change. And not we as a bottler are most affected. We have also the reduced CO2 emission, but think about the CO2 footprint of packaging, and what we put on the market is a beverage in packaging. To put the whole debate on a let's say more neutral level and more proactive level, and not continuing with the blaming, because you can't blame one participant in this whole discussion.
Where did the initiative come from, this new bottle? Was that the consumer demand, or was it that you as Coca-Cola wanted to launch?
We have the World Without Waste goals. James Quincy announced in January 2018 that we need to collect for every bottle we put in the market another bottle or can. So we will have a collection of 100%. It's a vision till 2030. and every market in the Coca-Cola system needs to work towards that. So we really had the motivation from our own goals, and it's what you mentioned, the corporate goals every company has. And that was the reason why we said, okay, let's do it, and let's start in Austria, because the Austrian market, when it comes to circular economies, is on a real high level, and it was possible to implement it here. But of course, and I'm totally honest, also our stakeholders expect us to do something and to move and to come up with new packaging, with new initiatives, with new concepts to deliver our beverage to our consumers.
So what new business models can we forecast and see based on, that has sustainability in its core, where you really can turn that into business opportunity? Anyone want to have a guess on that?
I think there's some really interesting models that have emerged over the last couple of years. I mean, I think some businesses will fundamentally change the way they, you have to embed sustainability in your practice. Every business now needs to start integrating sustainability and embed it in the whole business. But there's some really interesting, I think, models for like IKEA are now kind of like that whole idea of, you're now going to be able to, you rent your furniture and bring it back. Like they're better able, it's driven by the whole circular economy piece as well, because, consumers buy whatever furniture for whatever price and then don't know how to recycle it. But IKEA are now kind of this kind of rent your furniture concept that is being rolled out. And I think those kind of rent models are really interesting as well. I think there's a lot more sharing platforms as well, which is, a new kind of business model for change, and, swap shopping and things like that. I think while still niche, I think are beginning to kind of take off a little bit more. But so the whole circular piece and redesign, like rethinking the way where your products come from, that whole circular piece is definitely something that I think most companies and corporates are really kind of trying to integrate into their business models. So it's not linear, it's circular. There's no other way forward. So.
Can I step in on that? Because I think that the circular economy, and again the EU is going ahead with the directive in that sense, will be a game changer as well. And basically, when you're done with the product, you can throw it away. You can but what you should do actually, and that's why I was putting the question out there with what did you buy? You can reuse it as long as it lasts, or give it to somebody else who reuses it. You can refurbish it. That's the second best option, and then have it reused by somebody else or by yourself. Or you could recycle it. What happens to the bottles? That's the third best option you can have. And there are so many cool business models out there. I mean, you mentioned the furniture for rent. There are even washing machines that are for rent, where you pay per use or per washing cycle. And I think that those options will become much more, or that there's a German producer of mobile phones, Shift phones, where you can take apart a phone and then maybe upgrade the storage or upgrade the camera, and you don't lose the warranty. And yeah, that's cool things. And the more you price in the true value of goods, and be it CO2 or the whole value chain, the more you will come to a cost reality that will foster those business models. I think that's the way forward.
Yeah. The cascade is really important, because reuse is much better than recycle, and we should only recycle when we can't reuse. So I think always follow that order. The circularity in Austria is not even 10% of all the material throughput, 10%. And it's not just what consumers do, but it's also what designers do. It starts way back there. Because even if I want to have something repaired, if I want to have something reused, like a screen of that I use in my office for looking at my email, apparently there are, I don't know, 15 different types of screws, which makes it so often necessary to change the tool, which increases the cost per labor for repairing it so much that it never pays off. Yeah. But I don't think we can only design screens with 15 different screws. I think we can do better. But it needs to start with the designers. Next thing is, I mean, I always my papers normally end with policy recommendations unless it's a theoretical or a method development paper. So of course I think about policies. I think the good intentions need to also be reflected in the regulations. For example, the sharing, fantastic schemes that are in place, but we've recently seen 3, 4, 5 days ago in Vienna, the two key, or the biggest car sharing companies have merged. And what do monopolists do? They put up the price. That's what you would expect. I mean, again, economics 101. But not only did they put up the price, they also limited the area where you can get access to car sharing so much that it's only within the parts of Vienna which are fantastically catered for with public transport. So they're taking away mobility from public transport. They're not taking it away in the outer districts where people do still own cars, but they might consider not having one if they had access to a sharing scheme. So it's a good idea, but it needs to be regulated that if they want to operate in Vienna, well, they have to cater for the whole city of Vienna and not just the ones where it's really easy to earn a lot of money because people are just a bit too lazy and jump into the car instead of walking 200 meters further to the next tube stop. I'm so annoyed about this. I don't use it, I'm a cyclist.
But then you're almost asking a private company to be a public service provider if they're going to...
No, I ask regulators to set the scene and then let private companies operate within these rules. Because the markets deliver what the rules tell them. And at the moment, the rules are set wrong, so that the markets are delivering the wrong performance for society. And a lot of companies are trying to do the best anyways, even within these wrong rules. But it's hard.
There has to be an element of choice editing, and be that to customers, you know, what we provide our customers, and just only sustainable products should be available, but also for companies, because those decisions are then hard to make when you're trying to, you know, imagine that company trying to make that here, this is, you know, and they should, and it's a responsibility to serve everyone else, but it's more difficult for them to make that decision if that policy isn't there, because there's people sitting around a table saying, do we do X or do we do Y? This gets us this profits, this gets us that, and they're kind of should do, and I mean, we work in the same area, you know, obviously they should serve the wider community, but it should be choice editing, and it just makes it so much easier for everyone to make the right choices.
But something that's within the companies is probably moving towards thinking about services rather than products.
Yeah.
That's a really good indicator.
And maybe taking from that, well, the very reason why we exist as a company today is basically that service approach, first one, and also sustainability itself. Because what has happened was basically when the amount of intermittent renewable power increases in the grid, it becomes super difficult for the grid operators to balance all that power flows. And what happens if you don't balance this? The first thing that's going to happen is a brownout in some regions, and then the second is blackout. So, of course, I mean, sustainability has its, or at least in our part of the world, on the renewable side of the business, it has its own challenges, and then you need some companies or some sort of services to aggregate all these parks and basically operate them on a 24/7 basis with live data, lots of algorithms, lots of forecasting, and lots of trading. And this is exactly why we became a player, now basically aggregated more than 2,000 megawatts of pure renewable assets. This is the one in Turkey, and in Germany, around 1,200 megawatts. So what we are trying to add as a product next to it is basically, just to give you an example on how the entire value chain is being affected because of this, let's say, decarb or let's say low carbon economy. I think you're following what is happening to utilities all over the place. RWEs, EONs, NGs of this world, they're all sinking. I mean, they're trying a lot of different ways to survive, but that's not going to work. And basically, they even look into venture capital, new innovations, and so on. But that is not going to help changing their mindsets. That business is over. So, and why I can't say this? Because basically I see the decrease in the costs of operating or giving what exactly they are giving as a service, and how cheap it can be done, and how much more efficient it can be done by separate companies, separate new companies who does not have any assets. So it's like, we don't own any single megawatt of those assets we operate, but we are already offering more and interesting services compared to utilities.
Someone, you can't in order to produce energy, you need to have some capital, right?
Sure.
So someone not everyone can be asset light.
Sure.
Someone will have to invest in.
Yeah, and that comes actually more, if you look back the last 5-6 years, the amount who is being invested in renewable energy doesn't come from utilities anymore. It's more coming from funds. It's coming from, even pension funds. It comes from, directly through those corporates who want to clean or use renewable power. And then they don't need to operate those things. They just need some people to aggregate and operate the stuff. So that is how the value chain is changing. And just to give you an example, what we are now working on for the last, let's say, 16 months or so, we are cooperating with a non-energy retailer. Well, I can't even say the business, it's telecom business, to bundle a product where we real-time measure how much is being consumed at a commercial or household, and real-time balance this. By doing so, decrease the consumption by around 8 to 10%, and help the grid by that way. So we are just adding the demand side to the supply side in one portfolio. And then what is even more interesting is after getting them on board, after let's say having them on board for about 6 months or so, then we will, by some predictions and learnings, we will offer them a flat rate tariff, flat rate renewable tariff, which is, of course, it might sound like it's not inefficient or it's not efficient or so, but we also have some ideas around it, how to make it efficiently used. And then we collect all that data and send all these customers by showing how much each device uses in their homes and so on, or in their businesses or offices. So this kind of stuff, utilities are really, really far away from it. And that is why our entire value chain is now moving more to the A, digital, B, to the sustainable way of business doing.
So we spoke about new business models and what needs to be done. Anyone else want to comment on new business models? So we are here today.
Maybe one thing, because it has popped up, impact investment, and another thing that comes there into play is the social entrepreneurship. And I think social entrepreneurs are the startups of tomorrow, because at least in Austria, the startup term is a little bit overused. And now those social entrepreneurships, maybe one should define it what it is. It means companies give more value to their customers than pure economic return, or to the positive social effect, maybe on their employees, on their environment. And there are super interesting examples. For example, if you're in Vienna, you might want to take a shade tour. That's basically sightseeing by and with homeless people. And they show you the other side of Vienna, not the fancy one, but the one of homelessness. And it's super interesting. They are, take out your notebook. It's the first time a professor learns from me. But they are so on the one hand, they give employment opportunity to homeless people. On the second thing, they have an educational effect, because homelessness is something you don't want to get, and hopefully will not get in touch with. So basically, it fosters your understanding of the system, and it has a positive effect on society. Another one, if you want to take coffee, I'm a big fan of Vollpension. It's a coffee house that employs elderly people, grandmas and granddads, and they cook their delicious cakes everybody wants to have, and it props props up their pension, their small pension, gives them social aspect of interaction with young people, keeps them young, and on the other side, yeah, it's yummy.
I love those projects that are like that combination of social inclusion plus environment. There's one in Ireland where it's like I think there's people are convicted of crimes and for rehabilitation. You can't it's very difficult to get a job, but they've opened up like a bike shop where they repair old bikes and whatnot and do like a whole education piece around it. I think those examples, those examples are really good for to kind of see how we can change in small amounts. But I think for scalable, like really scalable solutions, I think it's something everyone's touched upon a little bit today is just like collaborations, like working with the likes of for us as a retailer, for us to we source green energy, but we do on-site renewables, we have solar, whatever else. But for us to go down and we're researching purchase power agreements at the moment, you just don't have the in-house expertise. You just don't no one person in our business is able to do that, and you need to collaborate with companies that have those expertise. And it's the same for any type of innovation. We don't even have packaging technology, we have packaging team, but they're not packaging technologies are really, and you need to work with sustainability experts, universities, and they have people doing PhDs in the intricate details of all these topics. Sustainability is such a broad, from climate to plastic to human rights to, there's so many topics that need to be, refrigerant gas is the detail that's required in those. And I think, working with the supply chain for us, whatever, with our suppliers, like they know their business, they know what gains can be made on whether it be on farm level or not. But I think for those kind of really scalable innovations, it really needs to be like a whole supply chain kind of collaboration, working with universities and industry.
So there's so much to touch on this subject, and we haven't spoken about measurements and reporting, but we are here this weekend to speak about graduations and work opportunities. So what's your best career advice to anyone who wants to be, we spoke, we should ask what can be done rather than, just rolling up our sleeves and try to get involved. But what would you recommend to, alumni or new graduates that can make this their career?
I think don't be afraid of the topic and let's say the whole big cloud that seems to lay over it. It doesn't matter which background you have. I, for example, have a communications background, and I wouldn't imagine 2 years ago that I'm that much interested in packaging strategies, difference between PET, PE. So every background is the right background for sustainability, I think, and for working in the sustainable area. And what is also important, especially when you want to drive sustainability in a big corporate like ours, to gain cross-functional experience. So use the opportunities if you work in a big corporate to switch departments, work for sales, work for supply chain, work for HR, work for finance, to get their point of view and their needs in terms of sustainability, and also to understand what their customers or stakeholders then need. So I think cross-functionality is really important to drive that topic.
Well, I mean, for me, of course, I'm a bit biased, right? So, but I don't understand really why people are not excited about renewable energies and why they're not excited about digital transformation of this business. Really, I don't get it. But as I said, I'm biased. But what I'm seeing is basically, I think this business, at least in general, power, oil and gas, I don't even talk about anymore, but the power business was considered to be super boring and super static and so on. But even in my, I think it's rather a short career, I think 13, 14 years. But as I said, the last 10 years of that was really, really exciting. And we're seeing a big transition currently in the business. So, and when there is a big transition happening, there are a lot of super interesting opportunities in the business. I mean, just imagine telecom industry 20, 25 years ago. All that revolution with cell phones and so on. And I think at least today it looks a bit more interesting than before. So utilities are boring, I fully agree, but utilities will not last. So I would say, I mean, in terms of corporate recruitment, well, the manner or the situation of the utilities, at least they're now trying to find ways and so on, and you can learn a lot from utilities and all these corporates. But I think what is even more interesting is that there are a lot of interesting startups all over the place who are really adding interesting value to the disrupted value chain, and they have fantastic ideas. And if you feel like you want to go to the startup world, I think energy is really one of the rather exciting ones. And if you have, you know, maybe you have some extraordinary, or not maybe even extraordinary, but decent coding skills and a bit of interest in, you know, what can be done in the renewables and so on, you can think of an idea. And because there are a lot of gaps at the moment, because the entire value chain is being reshaped. It was a centrally, let's say, centrally divided value chain, basically generation, big plants, you know, 800, 900 CCGTs, coal plants, whatsoever, megawatts, and then transmission, distribution, and sales. And this was it. And now all these companies are, or all that value in those big blocks are, you know, divided into maybe 100 or maybe even 1,000 different types of blocks. Aggregator business, virtual power plant business, charging business, solar rooftop, and all that smart grid management business. So, and none of them did exist before. So this is really an interesting era for at least our business. And I really encourage to, you know, to whoever wants to go to that direction. To
you might be inundated with CVs after
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a hugely growing area, and just like Raphael said, there's so many different you know, pillars within sustainability to work in. So whether you want to be, you know, supply chain expert, a sourcing expert, a packaging expert, energy expert, I mean, sustainability has so many different facets to it. So, you know, and even on the circular economy side of things, or even so, what I do in our business is we have a very small team, but we have responsible people for sustainability in each areas of the business. So even from our legal team, our sales team, driving sustainability projects within the business and taking ownership. So we roll out projects, we implement the strategy, and then, you know, it's up to the teams and the business to drive it. So, you know, if you're not sure that you know, you're interested in the area, you're not sure whether it's something you definitely want to delve into, but, you know, within your companies, there's projects you can take on. Like, you know, I recommend to everyone take on a sustainability project within your company and lead that and see how interested you are and let it grow, because it's just, you know, it is an area you do need to be very passionate about if you want to do it, because you know, it's not, you know, there are great reputational gains to it, but I mean, it is hard work as well, in terms of, you know, you're not gonna, it's not all jazz hands, so, you know, you're sometimes going against the grain. So
no, I think I've said that change is difficult to happen. So obviously, if you want to achieve change in an organization, you put
to push,
you have to push.
But yeah.
Do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I have 3 takeaways for you guys. First one is, even though I don't like the exponential use of the word sustainability, I would advise you to go into that topic of area, however you want to define it, because there will be good job opportunities. I mean, just look at the curve, the temperature curve the professor showed. So yeah, if you translate that into job opportunities, yeah, I think that's quite a good option. And the second thing is, today we know that sustainable solutions can and do work, and they make money and they make a good living, and often they're even much more fulfilling than traditional, just digging for money and so on stuff. And the third advice, it's more advice for daily life, is think what you buy, where you buy, what is the value chain, and also think where your money goes. Do ask your bank about how they invest the money you have on your account. There's also tools with which you can screen your funds. In Austria, there's one, it's called ESG+, and you can type in the number of your fund and see how sustainable it is.
See?
Well, the job market that I understand best is within academia. I'm not sure how interesting that is for you. I was always a bit bored of what was required of me. So while I'm an economist, this is how I added on the CEMS program, because at the time it was like, ooh, this is what the clever people do. So, this is how I ended up to be a CEMS alumni, because I thought that looks really good, doesn't it? So obviously, I've never worked in management. So I have a limited understanding of companies, as all economists have, because we only categorize companies as high profit making and low profit making, which is a bit dull. So my next best rule of thumb is think about companies along 3 different groups. On the one hand, companies that flourish at the moment just niches. They are companies that help sustainability to be brought forward. Yeah, they were started maybe because people wanted to foster sustainability. At the moment, they are being hindered in scaling up because of the rules that we talked about earlier. The regulations aren't there that would give them sort of more leeway. They will grow. Sooner or later, they will grow. They will become more important. Yeah? Then there's another group of companies that can change easily. Yeah? Maybe consultants or a lot of other companies, maybe also food retailers, because they will provide food, everybody will need food, and they'll provide it a bit more fair trade, a bit more organic, or less. Yeah? And hopefully in future, only fair trade and only organic. But it's different, but it's still the same core business, and we understand that everybody needs that. And there's a third group of companies which is so obvious that they will get in deep trouble in the near future. If their core is mineral oil, or if their core is core business is extremely carbon intense, they'll need to change very fast. I'll give you an example of a company that I learned last week about in a research workshop that Günther Stahl hosted. A Canadian company, I didn't have time yet to investigate it, but I was told about it. A Canadian company that had at its core beef production and beef processing and selling that. I mean, that's extremely climate intense. So a lot of people, for health reasons as well as for climate reasons, are moving away from that. So that is a company that it's at its very core, given our current understanding of grand societal challenges, they are in trouble. Yeah? They, within a very short period of time, apparently have transformed to plant-based protein. I don't have enough details of how successful they've been and so on, but that is a bold move. Yeah? So they are trying. Some other companies that have at their core a really problematic product or service will try to do the same. If you see indications of that, it may be risky, but it may be interesting. For the others who are very carbon intense and are not moving, trying to still defend, and they're talking about the energy efficiency improvements of the light bulbs and whatnot, I would say because they're bound to become, their economic performance will have to go down and become stranded assets. So I would not move into these areas. And yeah, I think this is the very rough guidance that I could give you. Oh, the last one I would say, since I was the 1993 alumni, so maybe I have the most experience, at least, if we can put it that way. Try not to look for the companies that have developed sort of a fantastic story around them, or a corporate world, or I don't know, that drags young talents in. Look behind that. Look behind also the fringe benefits and all the frills that you get. Because in 20 years, in 30 years, what you're looking for is a job that really makes you want to go to your workplace. Where you know that you're making a contribution, a positive contribution to society. There's a book from a researcher, Grebner, and it's called Bullshit Jobs. There are too many bullshit jobs around which sound nice, give you good money, but over the years, it winds you down. You start thinking about it, and if you need to explain to your children what are you actually doing, it becomes difficult, and that somehow nags away. Don't underestimate that. So try to find something that you're proud of doing, where you know you're contributing something, and that can be in very different sectors. I love going to work every day because I meet young people, and I feel privileged of being paid for reading. I mean, amazing.
So, do we have any questions from the audience?
Yeah. So for us, when we'd like looking at something like that, like from a retail perspective, like so there's a role for customers, there's a role for policymakers, and there's a role for business. And I suppose, you know, for us as a business, we decide we do a very complex kind of materiality assessment on what we are going to achieve, what we aren't, because there's so much stuff that you need to look at. But there's also a role for customers, and when we trial all this stuff like taking plastic off fruit and veg or not stocking a non-seasonal product, you will see a huge shift in our sales. So like customers will say, okay, and that's where you as a retailer, we have to come to the point where we say, okay, do we choice edit and say, okay, well, it doesn't matter. We're just going to not sell it, and we're going to like take a huge stance on it. We're going to be pioneering. Lidl aren't. We'd never just not. But not now, but like maybe in 5 years' time, we'll have to not sell a seasonal product at a certain period of time. That would probably be pioneering for it. But there's
so you could just put in sign seasonal?
Yeah.
Not seasonal.
Yes, that's my
I mean,
so you can change the growing mode.
So yeah, so what you can do, I suppose, is have that kind of like educate customers on, what's seasonal, what's not seasonal, why it's better to buy this and not that. Ultimately, we'll all have to, given the emissions, and we'll all have to change our models more. But it's very interesting how customers make their choices, and that, when we talk about sustainability, we can't throw stones at our customers because that wouldn't be good for our reputation. But it's very interesting to watch the behaviours and trials that we do on all these products, because customers will 100% say that we don't want packaging, and we take packaging off our products, and they won't buy it because it's not convenient.
Yeah.
And it's incredible to see the change. And then we create a huge food waste problem. I know it's not maybe going off topic here, but we'll create a huge environmental problem from food waste if we take the packaging off on some of our products. We have to test all those things and like decide whether it's the right or wrong thing. But as a customer, we can educate customers as well. But we're all customers, and we actually need to be very careful in the choices we make as well. And because as a retailer, we'll respond to what a customer does or wants or behaves. So there's a responsibility across the supply chain. So if everyone were like you and said, no, I'm not going to buy that, it's not in season, it would be a very easy decision for a retailer to make.
Happily answered. Thank you very much. Policymakers, how do they respond? Well, maybe first I talk a bit about my ethos of advising policymakers. I think there is there are different roles for scientists and analysts, and then for somebody who is democratically legitimized for making decisions. So when we come up with policy recommendations, we always try to come up with these recommendations so that they are either, well, these are no-brainers, we definitely need to do that. Whichever values in society you are reflecting, or your group or your party is reflecting, this is something we definitely need to do. And for other elements of maybe policy pathways, to leave different options open, so that different groups of society can reflect the different values. Yeah? It's not for us to be prescriptive, it's not about a blueprint, but to show different paths that lead to that goal, for example, reducing inequality and staying within the 1.5-degree goal. And I think that works because that leaves everybody there part of a role, and not, it's like, okay, now we're getting what we have to do from the scientists. That's not how it should be. But with some measures in the climate area at the moment, it's like, give me a break, this is a no-brainer, we need to do this, get on with it. I think in the areas, in the countries, in the geographical scale, because of course government consists of different players or different geographical scales, where people are trying to do policy that is evidence-based. It is a delight to work with policymakers. because they tell you about their barriers, they tell you about their concerns of which interests they need to cater for, but where they see opportunities and you sort of do your analysis and you co-developing a path. That works. What I find really problematic is areas, parties, decision makers. It's a bit unprofessional to do policy that is not evidence-based. And unfortunately, we see too much of that. It's simply unprofessional because I'm very happy when sometimes journalists call me up and say like, oh, party X or Y said that, or Minister X or Y said that they're going to achieve the climate goal. I'm like, well, show me the calculations, show me the study, the model. I'll be very happy to give it thought and consideration. And maybe we come to different conclusions because I have a different model and we talk about it, that's fine. But then I don't get anything. And then I know there isn't a study. There is not an analysis. There is not a model. It's just, I don't want that. And that is simply unprofessional. This is where I get really annoyed about it.
Well, can I just add one thing on that? Because I think it's just a very, I think it's this academy versus business gap in some cases, maybe not in all, but I remember back in 2008 when I started working at the trading floor, it was the times when the wind and solar capacity in Germany was rapidly increasing. And of course, immediately it has effects on prices and so on. But then in 2013, I was attending to a conference, rather academic conference on international energy economics and so on. And there was a professor, very, very nice guy. And he has, I think, spent around 2 years to 2.5 years to analyze and come with an evidence saying that, well, the conclusion of the paper was, when the wind blows, prices go down. When it doesn't blow, prices go up. It took like 4 or 5 years after the fact was really taking place. So then my dilemma was, okay, well, if I were to say that after my 1 month training in the trading floor, it's like, oh, Erika, I found this fact. They would just throw me out of the window. Really. So this is a big problem, I think, in today's society, how to close that gap. I don't know, probably you also have a lot of vice versa examples, but I think that's also another issue.
Yeah, I think that kind of relates to my point about choice editing and nudging. There's a really great book called Nudge, and it's all, you've probably read it, about kind of that behavioural piece. And I mean, for us as a retailer, healthy aisles and placement of loose fruit and vegetables, and all those like we know exactly where consumers look, where they spend time, what kind of pricing, what kind of logos. So yeah, they're all topics that we need to nudge in that direction. Yeah.
I mean, I think it's a responsibility of the companies to take leadership there. And to come back to my Römerquelle example, we do not have the evidence now that we increased our sales volume. Not at all. We can't tell because the mineral water market in general is very difficult and based various circumstances. But we will do it anyway. Why? Because it contributes to our bigger picture and to our goal I mentioned. And maybe we fail with that, but at least we tried. So I think there's a lot of try and error, and hopefully consumers then, that's what I understand also for taking leadership as a corporate, hopefully the consumer will follow and then change their buying behavior.
Just one thought, if you put it on companies, they should direct customers in the right way and so on, it means policy is fucked up, right? Just putting it.
I think there is also an educational task, namely that citizens and consumers need to be enabled to develop a carbon instinct. So to know what makes a bigger difference, or also to be able to scrutinize messages. Since this is a different country, maybe I find it easier to mention that. Munich airport, at some point I walked through and they said like, oh, we want to become carbon neutral. What? Actually become carbon neutral. They have already reduced their emissions by 50%, but it's of course only the airport operations. So they have put energy saving light bulbs, they have electric cars that are moving around the luggage and so on, which is all good and well. But of course, it sends the signal, oh, your flying is becoming carbon neutral. They're not saying that, they're not lying, but it's sort of implying. Yeah, and maybe it's fair game that they try to do that, but individuals need to be much more versed in identifying these things, spotting them like, what? That can't be true, and what really needs to be done. Take trains and so on, and not just change light bulbs in the airport. So I think a carbon instinct, that's what we.
So that's a good cue. So just to round off. So Sigrid, I got very good. You were the quote master of today. So we have learned, no bullshit jobs and what needs to be done. A few great quotes out of this session. Then also I will encourage you, because it is a lot about facts, and this quiz is something that everyone can do, and I would say it's instructive and humbling, and there you can see what really impacts climate change. And sometimes we think that some of our actions are very effective, but this quiz will give you some guidance. And I guess so. This is very. Sigrid also spoke about, or a lot of you have been mentioning inter-science and corporations, and I think this we all have to recognize that it's a lot of complexity when you speak with sustainability, and we have to work together. So the only thing we can do is really to go with humility. And I personally think that 2020 will all be about climate change and also reduction of plastics. So with that, I know people are already heading over to the graduation, but thanks so much for taking time, and thanks to the audience. Without you, we wouldn't have have this discussion. So thanks a lot.